whatever talks are taking place, Ukraine needs to be at the table. And this might seem obvious for people in the UK and in France. It wasn't that obvious for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, especially when when you're reminded of what happened in the Oval Office on Friday.
President Macron of France and Sir Keir Starmer are holding talks today after talks in Brussels amongst the EU leaders yesterday. Britain and France are leading efforts to form a so-called coalition of the willing that would be prepared to put boots on the ground to uphold any agreement to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. President Macron's also been considering extending the protection of France's nuclear arsenal to European allies this week. He says that Europe needs to be ready to accept that the US may not remain by our side. Eleonore Cariot is an MP in Macron's Renaissance Party. Eleonore, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, how would you describe the relationship between Macron and Starmer at this point? Because it seems as though France and the UK are becoming closer than ever.
Absolutely. And I have to say, it is an excellent news. I believe that the relationship between France and the UK is as good as it has ever been in the past years, especially since Brexit. And I think we see now how aligned we are when it comes to the very big geopolitical changes that are taking place. So I welcome this new relationship, and I'm glad that our two leaders are working together.
Do you think they are guilty of wishful thinking, that they are still fighting to try to retrieve something that is, you know, in the distant history of 2 weeks ago, that is the US and its enthusiasm for NATO and for protecting Europe? And there still seems to be an effort by Macron and Starmer to win Trump over. And I just wonder if actually that is not the right direction to go in.
Well, you know, in diplomacy, you always have to try everything that is possible. So obviously, the United States are our ally. We've worked together throughout history. We used to be completely aligned. Now, with the Trump administration and the position it has taken towards Ukraine and Russia, things are more complicated, and obviously our leaders see it, and they integrate this factor into their behavior. But this being said, the desire is to continue working with the US, or at least being allies. But this being said, it does not prevent the UK and France from taking real action and making real proposals, such as the proposal that was presented by President Macron after the meeting he had in London with several European leaders and Volodymyr Zelensky, called upon by Sir Keir Starmer. So I believe that there's two things. One thing is obviously trying to continue the diplomatic way and continuing the discussions with the US. But on the other hand, increasing our autonomy and showing that we're capable of making proposals, because both the UK and France are two nuclear powers.
What about this meeting that's coming up in Saudi Arabia next week between US and Ukrainian officials? Does that go anywhere close to helping or indeed hindering what we understand Prime Minister Starmer and President Macron have been working on even this week, this idea of finalising some sort of arrangement with Ukraine, a peace plan to present to the US? But actually, this meeting in Saudi Arabia could detract from that.
Well, one thing is certain is that whatever talks are taking place, Ukraine needs to be at the table. And this might seem obvious for people in the UK and in France. It wasn't that obvious for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, especially when you're reminded of what happened in the Oval Office on Friday. So I believe that if talks are to take place, then they're always welcome, especially if Ukraine is on the table. The idea is not to be at the table for the sake of it. The idea is to ensure that whatever peace talks are undertaken, they mean a real peace with security guarantees for Ukraine and not handing over Ukraine to Russia.
Is it your understanding that President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer and President Zelensky will visit Washington, D.C. together as a collective at some point soon?
I read that they were contemplating this possibility. I think it would be a good idea. They both went to Washington 48 hours apart from each other and had very similar talks with President Donald Trump, I believe it would be a good idea to have a meeting together.
What about the coalition of the willing as well, Eleanor? I want to ask you about this idea, which is central to Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron's efforts here. And it's reported that around 20 countries are enthused by this idea, are willing to be a part of this. This is all part of the aforementioned peace plan to offer peacekeepers to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. I do wonder how this will work, because there are at least 2 NATO members, Slovakia and Hungary, who are going to veto anything that Putin doesn't like. And so there's a consideration of Hungary's role within the EU as well in all of this. So how is the coalition of the willing being built?
It is indeed a complex coalition to build because of NATO, as you rightly mentioned, but also because of the coordination that takes place within the European Union. So there's several layers to the way we can act, in particular with the military, and we have to be extremely careful because they're instruments that, of course, can lead to a generalization of the conflict, which is something that we absolutely want to avoid. Now, the idea behind the coalition of the willing is to ensure that whatever ceasefire we reach, whatever truce we reach, whatever peace we manage to obtain, it is a fair, durable one, and one that provides guarantee to Ukraine. And the reason we are insisting that much on this very aspect is because we remember what happened with the Minsk Protocol not that long ago, and how Russia is not a trustworthy partner. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to trust their willingness to come to an agreement at some point, but this has to be proven. And the only way it can be proven if there is a security force that is there to also show the muscles, the European muscles, and prevent Vladimir Putin from, continuing his invasion war.
Really interesting to speak to you this morning, Eleanor. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. We'll speak again, I'm sure. That is Eleonore Cariot, who's an MP in President Macron's Renaissance Party. It's worth noting, I think, the coalition of the willing. We've reflected this before, that it is a phrase that is familiar to us to describe these nations that are potentially going to become involved in this peacekeeping effort. There's lots of speculation about who the 20 nations might be, but there's also a kind of diplomatic undertone to it. Is this designed to show President Trump that Europe is serious about taking on the defence burden, taking more responsibility for the defence of Ukraine, because it's so central to the plan, and because it has been used in the past when it comes to America and the UK working together in previous conflicts? Is that actually what this is about? Is setting the scene, I suppose, for what could transpire?
Lots of getting in touch with us about a conversation about how you grow the British Army as well. Nigel says it's okay talking about recruiting into the armed forces, but kids today aren't interested in a life in the forces. Yeah,
that's fascinating. That would you be able to sign up? Would you be keen to sign up or not? This one is from Rob. I've tried to join every branch of the reserves, but I've been rejected because I have type 1 diabetes and there's a blanket ban in place. Each time there was no conversation as to how my health is, just an automatic no. This may have made sense in the 1950s, but with modern technology and the geopolitical need, this seems out of date. How many other willing groups are being rejected because of outdated rules? I'd love to see the Ministry of Defence review these policies.